Parshas Miketz. The parsha begins with a description of Paro's troubled night sleeping. He's troubled because he has these wacky dreams where the small things are consuming the big things. The 7 skinny cows are consuming the 7 fat cows, and the 7 withered sheaves of grain consume the robust sheaves, and he can't figure it out, and no one can satisfactorily interpret the dream for him. And then the Saramashkim, the chief butler, remembers Yosef, and he reminds Paro, somewhat sheepishly, that he, the Saramashkim, was in prison, and there was this Na'ar Ivri, this young Jew, who knew how to interpret dreams. So Paro says, okay, let's get him. So they rush Paro out of the prison, out of the bor, and they clean him up, and they present him to Paro. And Paro says, okay, I've dreamt the dream, chalom chalamti, poseri no so. I don't have anybody to interpret it. And I've heard about you that you can hear a dream and you can interpret it. And Yosef's first words to Paro are, it's not me. Vayan Yosef Paro es Paro lemor bil adoy. It's not me. Elokim yanesh lom Paro. God will talk about the welfare of Paro, Paro's welfare. In other words, he deflects credit, and he attributes it to the one, capital O, ultimately responsible. So Paro continues, okay, if that's what you say, and he explains his dream. And then Yosef he starts saying, your 2 dreams are one, and it's what God is telling you he is going to do. Es asher ha'elokim oseh higilu Paro. Yosef is constantly referring to God. And then he says, what God is going to do, he has shown to Paro. And he tells him what to do. And then he tells him also the fact that it happened twice, is that this stuff is happening quickly from God. Yosef can't stop talking about God. And so ultimately, and he gives him a plan, he gives Paro a plan about conserving resources and then ultimately surviving the years of deprivation. And Paro thought it was a good thing, and he says, and Paro finally, this is Paro, who is considered to be a god or a demigod in Egypt, and Paro says to his staff, El Avadav, Hanimtza Kazeh Ish Asher Ruach Elokim Bo. Is there such a man like this, who has the Spirit of God in him? And then Paro says to Yosef, seems like Yosef successfully communicated to Paro, at least for now, that God is in the driver's seat. What is going on with Yosef and God? What's the point here? Why is he constantly referring to God? He has an opportunity to rise to greatness. One might say that he knew, perhaps, Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh explains lots of things. But sometimes it's an easy answer when it kind of short circuits the question if you say, well, he knew. But let's just assume for a minute that Yosef was taking a risk by introducing this notion of God. Why was he so persistent? Okay, that's one question. Next question is about Chanuka. This is Shabbos Chanuka this year is coming up. And the Gemara talks about Chanuka. First it talks about candles. And talks about what kinds of candles are okay to use, what can be used on Shabbos, what can be used on Chanuka. And then it says, as long as we're talking about Chanuka, my Chanuka. What is Chanuka? Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, on the 25th of Kislev, Yom Chanukah Tamonya, there were 8 days of Chanukah. Inun v'lo l'mispad bun v'lo l'shanos bun. We don't eulogize heavily. We don't fast. And then it says, so that's how we celebrate. We don't eulogize and fast. Very interesting. Then it says, when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, so they defiled all of the oil. And then, and when the Chashmonoim got stronger and defeated them. They found only one cruse of oil that was certified as pure by the Kohen Gadol, and it only was sufficient to burn for one day. But Nasa Bones, a miracle occurred, and and it lasted for 8 days. And the following year, they made it Yom Tov for Hallel, for praise and for Thanksgiving. So we see that the holiday of Chanuka is about the finding of a jar of oil that was suitable for lighting the candles, for lighting the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, and that a limited supply actually exceeded its natural limits and ended up being multiplied by 8 times. It was, instead of burning out in one day, it burned out in 8. Now, if we look, on the other hand, at the insertion, the special prayer of Hallel and Hodah, this is Hodah that we say in Shemona Esrei and in Birchas Hamazon, in both the regular prayer and in the prayer we say after eating. We say, we thank you for this. Here's the following. We say for Al Hanisim, Al Purkon, Al Gvros, and all the salvations you gave us. And then the text describes in some detail the miracle. And what's the miracle? When the Greeks stood up against Israel, and they wanted to cause the Jews to forget their Torah and to get them to violate your will. And you, in your great mercy, you stood behind them, you fought for them, you executed justice, you took vengeance for them, you delivered the mighty into the weak, the many into the few, the impure to the pure, the evil into the righteous, and the scoffers into the hands of those who learn with Torah. And you made a great miracle, and a great salvation, and then they came to the Beis Hamikdash, and they cleaned it up, and they purified it, and they lit candles, and they set the holiday of 8 days. What is going on here? The Gemara just said that the miracle is all about the oil and how it lasted 8 days. We don't hear a thing about it in Al Hanisim. In Al Hanisim, all we hear about is the amazing turnaround of battle, that God helped us be victorious. So which is it? Is it the same holiday? Well, the Gemara refers to when they were, one word, when they were nitzchum, when they prevailed in war. And Al Hanisim makes a slight allusion. It says, Hidliku neros b'chatzos kachecha. They lit candles in your holy sanctuary. But the emphases are completely different. So I heard an answer. I've forgotten where it is, and if somebody can remind me, I'll be very grateful. That there is an ever-present problem when somebody wins, when somebody is successful, when somebody is victorious, whether in battle or in commerce, in welfare, in family life. And the issue is, as the Torah in Devarim says, Devarim 8:17, Ches Yud Zayin. This is talking about after HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Egypt and gave us man and enabled us to survive and to succeed. And then the Torah says, and you'll say in your mind, you'll say, I did this. This was my power. This is the strength of my hand that accomplished all of this. It's a very difficult challenge to live in this world, to enjoy success, and to understand, nevertheless, that the success is attributable to God, and we are but tools in the hands of God. Our success would be absolutely impossible without God. It's really God doing the work through us, and we have much to be thankful for. So what does this have to do with anything? So we know that this has to do with Yosef. Yosef runs a great risk spiritually of basking in the glory of his successful interpretations. And he knows, Yosef HaTzadik, the righteous Yosef, knows exactly what's the source of his inspired interpretations, and that's Elohim. And he makes no bones about it, and he uses apparently every opportunity to declare it because he knows fundamentally it is true. And ironically, it appears that not only does it not take away from his projection of power, but it actually, as we see from Paro's response, have you ever seen anybody like this who's got the Spirit of God in him, that not only can he interpret dreams, but he's got the Spirit of God in him. So ironically, it ends up bolstering Yosef's status in the eyes of Paro. Now, what about Chanuka? What about the question that we asked about Chanuka? What's going on? The Gemara says it's about the oil. And the Hanisim says it's about the battle. Well, it's interesting. We don't celebrate by having crossed swords or implements of destruction or some kind of memorabilia of warfare, but rather we have oil. Why might that be? So the answer that I recall is this risk of kochi v'otzem yodi, of ascribing military success as well as other successes to our own power. And Chazal, the rabbis, when they instituted the celebration of Chanuka, they said we have to stay away from that. We have to stay away from the military parades and from the show of strength, because that's not who we are, and that's not where our power comes from. Our power comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ner mitzvah v'torah or. The power comes from the ultimate giver of light, Vayhi Or, that comes from the Almighty. So what about Hanisim? Well, the miracle was the battle. The light is reflective of that miracle, but the miracle is the battle. But there's a risk. We can't glorify the battle. But you know when we can mention it? We can mention it when we're in Shemona Esrei. We can mention it when we're deep in prayer to the Almighty, because then there's no question that we are attributing our success to God. And we can be nuanced in that expression. And we can say it mitoch hatfilah, and then it's beyond any question that we are ascribing our military success to the Almighty. Ultimately, it's one and the same. Ultimately, it's Rabim biad ma'atim. It's the many in the hands of the few. It's the 8 days that came about, 8 days of illumination that came about from fuel that was insufficient for 8 days. It was sufficient only for one. Conceptually, it's the same miracle. It's the overcoming of nature. As the Maharal explains, that the 8 days of Chanuka reflect lamala min teva. Teva, nature, is reflected in 7, in the ordinary cycle. Cycle of the week, cycle of years. That's predictable. That's nature. And Chanuka reflects lamala min teva, reflects above nature. Where do we get this above nature? Where do we get this power? The power is ner mitzvah, the Torah or. Comes from the Torah, comes from the mitzvah, comes from the Chashmonoim, who were dedicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They did not allow themselves to be influenced by the prevailing culture and to abandon their faith, but rather they clung to it tenaciously and they fought for it so that they would reinstitute the glory of God in the temple. And for that reason, we say Al Hanisim in Shemona Esrei to give credit where it belongs. The credit for our success is squarely in the hands of the Almighty. Have a good Shabbos and a happy Chanuka.